Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are around the world. I welcome you cordially from the Research Center for Climate Law at the University of Graz in Austria. I welcome you to the second session of our International Conference on Soil Law and Governance, which we conduct today in cooperation with the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences at Vienna in Austria, together with the United Nations Environment Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and of course, our partner, the German Environment Agency. Our second session today is going to deal with best practices and innovative regulatory approaches. Before we start this session, I would briefly like to give my colleague, Carlotta, the opportunity to share some of the response comments that we received from the first session. Over to you, Carlotta.
So it was a very interactive chat indeed, and there's unfortunately no time to read out everything, but we're encouraged to pose more questions in the next session and more comments. But anyway, the last session, we had a question from Harald Ginzky to Vera Berger from the Food and Agriculture Organization that we didn't manage to hear, but Vera Berger did write the answer in the chat. So the question was, what are the obstacles to sustainable soil management and how could they be overcome? And the answer to that is quite comprehensive. So obstacles are unsustainable agri-food systems and increased pressure on natural resources, including land and soils, by increasing population, land use change, including urbanization and deforestation. And all these factors do lead to soil degradation. On the other hand, with regard to solutions, fostering resilient and sustainable agri-food systems integrated across landscapes, involving stakeholders and participating in land use planning processes, as well as guaranteeing land governance and tenure security are key elements for reducing soil degradation. And capacities need to be fostered at all levels, and support has to be provided to decision makers to promote the implementation of sustainable soil management practices. So we thank Ms. Berger for this very comprehensive answer, and I do go back to you.
Thank you, Carlotta, for sharing those chat comments with us. I also encourage the audience to actively engage both in the chat but also by raising their hands during the panels. We invite contributions if they are short and precise. With that, I would like to open this session introducing the panelists of this panel. We will start off with a person that you have already met during the first session, and that is Dr. Harald Ginzky, my colleague from the German Environment Agency, where he's a lead scientist dealing especially with the element of soil protection. The second person is Professor Pamela Towela Sambo. Pamela, good afternoon and welcome to Lusaka, Zambia. Pamela is a professor of law in the Department of Private Law at the University of Zambia Law School. Good afternoon, Pamela, once again. The third person.
Good afternoon.
The third person on the panel is our colleague, Professor Ginzky, who is a professor of law, particularly environmental law, from Wuhan University in China. Tianbao, I trust that you are well. Can you quickly raise your hand or identify yourself whether the connectivity is a given? Okay, wonderful. The audio system works as well? Not yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
That's good.
Welcome to Wuhan in China. Good evening, in fact.
Ja,
Already
guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen? Ja.
And the third person on the panel is Professor Gernot Stöcklehner, who is a professor in the Institute of Spatial Planning, Environmental Planning, and Land Rearrangement at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna, Austria. I have received the message that he may only join this panel a bit later. If he's not available as of yet, we should then nevertheless start the session. Every panelist will be provided with a maximum of 10 minutes because we want to provide opportunity for exchange and discussion afterwards. And we will start off the first session by Dr. Harald Ginzky on German soil legislation. You will recall, having attended the first session this morning, that Professor Dirk Messner also already mentioned that there are various activities going on in terms of German legislative efforts, also in response to European soil policy. And Dr. Ginzky, who is personally involved in some of these processes, is going to share some slides with us on a new soil law for Germany, challenges and conceptual approaches. Dr. Ginzky, the floor is yours.
Okay, many thanks, Oliver, for the kind introduction. You see the title of my presentation, and this is the outline for the presentation. I will first talk a bit about the main drivers of soil degradation in Germany. Then I would like to explain to you how is the soil governance right now structured in Germany and what are the main deficits. And I will talk about the mandate which was given by the new government of last year to draft a new legislation, in fact, and our thoughts on conceptual approaches, next steps, and political issues. If Oliver has said that I'm involved in these projects, this is correct. I work for the German Environment Agency. We are the consultative board for the Environment Ministry, which is in fact in charge of drafting the new legislation. And I am kind of a member of the drafting team, so we actually really sit together every second week and draft the text of this new legislation, which is demanding. So now to give you an impression, what are the main drivers of soil degradation in Germany? You can, of course, mention more of the 5, which you see right now on this slide. But these are the main drivers. First, soil contaminations during industrialization in the last 2 centuries. In Germany, you may found around 450,000 brownfields, which is a number, which all lead to soil and ground pollution. And if you be aware of the higher density of population of about 400 people per square kilometer, then you need to, you will understand that the rehabilitation of these brownfields are just necessary because they affect human health, food production, and other purposes. So they have an immediate effect on the living conditions of people, which is a very complicated time and resource-intensive task. Second point, second main driver in Germany of soil degradation is soil sealing and land take to urban sprawl and infrastructure projects. We have a number, land take, we have a number for land take. We have about 60 hectares per day in Germany, and half of this land take is soil sealing, which means 30 hectares per day are sealed and destructive, in fact. A third main driver of soil degradation is erosion through industrialized agriculture, then soil compaction through unsustainable construction work, and last but not least, loss of soil quality through water scarcity, which is actually a quite new effect in Germany. The current soil governance, please the next slide. Thanks, Larissa. Mr. Li Feng this morning mentioned countries which have soil protection law for itself in their countries. Germany is one of these countries, one of 17 countries. We have a Soil Protection Act of 1998 in conjunction with the Soil Protection Ordinance of the next year, 1999. But you need to know that the focus of this law is very much on the rehabilitation of brownfields. And for that, we have really defining environmental quality standards, which is extremely helpful. In charge are the soil protection authorities. This is a well-functioning system, but as an extent, this is very resource intensive. That we have a drop of water. Then for many other potentially detrimental activities, which might be detrimental for soils, we have sectoral provisions. For town planning, in urban sport, we have a known law. For example, we have a law for the use of pesticides, and we have laws for mining, industrial installation, and infrastructure. But these provisions are quite weak in regard to soil protection because there are no binding standards for soils and there's no competence or a very weak competence of soil protection authorities to intervene in the implementation of these acts. Yeah. So the deficits of the current legislation are the following. First, the focus very much of identification, assessment, and rehabilitation of brownfields. So the focus is on contamination, and biological and physical features of soils are only sparsely addressed. Same goes for climate mitigation, adaptation, which are not very prominent in this law. Second point, the focus is on rehabilitation, and as the Messner this morning said, prevention, precautionary measures, ex ante control are not really included in this law. Further deficits of the current legislation with regard to agriculture and soils. There's also only very vague principles of good agricultural practices, which in fact have only a very limited steering effect. And the last but not less important deficit is that the competence of soil authorities to intervene in the implementation of these other sectoral laws, as I have mentioned it, is very limited. So there are no ex ante control mechanisms for potentially detrimental effects of soils. Fortunately, the new government of last year decided in their political program to mandate the Environment Ministry to draft a new law. And this is a rough translation of these words in the political program. We will evaluate the German Soil Protection Act and we will adapt it to the needs of climate mitigation adaptation as well of maintaining biodiversity, taking into account the various usages of soils. And the second statement at the EU level, we will strive for better protection of soils and legally binding instruments. Next slide, please. So what are the conceptual approaches which we have in mind? First, we want to install an ex ante permission control of potentially detrimental activities by soil authorities. And we want to do it, and by this, negative effects should be avoided or minimized, and there should be an obligation to compensate unavoidable negative effects. Secondly, we want to get to a stronger involvement of the soil protection authorities, as soils need a stakeholder, and all soil expertise which is with the soil protection authority should be involved in the decision making. Third, we need instruments to control, advise, support farmers concerning sustainable management of soils. I use the three terms: control, advise, support, because this must be balanced. On one hand, farmers need fertile soils, but then maybe also there's a thought in the long-term perspective of farmers with regard to fertile soils. They want of course make money out of their land and of their soils in short term, but on the other hand, they need to maintain the quality of soil. So there's a kind of a conflict between short-term and long-term interests. There's a risk of overregulation, which we need also to take into account. But in the end, fertile soils are essential. There is a need also not only to avoid negative effects on soils, but to improve the status, the quality of soils, to enhance the quality. And there are two, and we haven't decided yet which way to go. There's a kind of a holistic approach that to assess all soils with regard to their properties and to decide which status they have and which measures are needed to get to a healthy status, which is a very complex, as I said, holistic approach. And the other way would be to have more specific measures with regard to the main drivers, such as soil stealing, soil erosion, and others, in order to avoid to have immediate effects on the ground. Then we need new regulations concerning new contaminants, for example, plastics in soils, and we need, as was it said this morning, a better soil monitoring system for more information and more improved data flows. This is the last slide. Next slide, please. The next steps. I want to say that there's hard work in front of us. We need to discuss best regulatory concepts, and we need also to develop environmental quality standards for all drivers of soil degradation. We have decided that we want to do that not only by our own expertise, but we need a broad and continuous involvement of all experts and stakeholders, such as soil scientists, implementers at the local level, regulators, public authorities, and farmers and other stakeholders. We have also decided that we do this involvement of experts and stakeholders in formal terms, but also informally. So we have very close relations and talk to these people. But still, I have asked this morning about the obstacles. There are a lot of conflicting interests and objectives. There's, for example, a strong statement that there should be no new bureaucracy for the renewable energy projects. And we have to deal with the energy crisis and the food security, and of course with stakeholder interest. And all these interests needs to be balanced. And in the end, we need a good regulatory system. And my last slide, takeaways. We are on high time pressure. This was said many times this morning. Therefore, we need measures to deal with the status of soils immediately, not in the future. We need to take into account the main drivers. Soil is a natural resource which has many ecological and social services. And we need custodians of soils. And these are normally the soil protection authorities. We need an ex-ante control, and legally binding environmental quality standards are needed for good implementation.
Thank you very much, Harald. Thanks, Dr. Ginzky, for the presentation on the German soil protection law and legislation. Many things that have been raised that will probably also raise some eyebrows, like for instance, the statement, no bureaucracy for renewable energy projects.
No
new bureaucracy for renewable energy projects. That is something which is understandable. We live in times of energy crisis, but there may be critique involved from other sectors as well. But we will enter that discussion when we get there. In the meantime, I would like to welcome my colleague Pamela Towela Sambo, Professor Sambo from the University of Zambia in Lusaka, in order to share some insights from Zambia, from the Southern African Development Community region in Southern Africa, from the African continent. Professor Sambo and Harald and myself, we have worked together on African soil legislation, not only in Zambia, but in many African countries. And I'm very grateful that she could find some time to share some of the insights and results, not only from our project, but also from her individual research. Pamela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Harald. Just a correction, I'm still yet to be a professor like you. I'm still aspiring, Dr. Pamela Sambo. And good afternoon to all the participants. It's such a pleasure to be before all of you discussing this important subject of soil governance at the global level and looking at lessons that we can learn from our different regions and countries. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So I'm going to focus on looking at what I'm saying is the African soil legislation perspective, looking at a few results from the study that we conducted, as Harald has, Oliver has already mentioned, together with Harald and Christopher, as well as Patricia from Kenya. Very interesting. Although the study is, we can move on to the next slide, please, Larissa. So this study was conducted in 3 countries, as we have mentioned, Cameroon, Kenya, and Zambia, from about 2018 to date. And we've been having different publications relating to sustainable management of soil. And we have treated this simply as a baseline study, although we have just looked closely at these 3 countries spread across the 3 regions of Africa. We look at it in terms of establishing a baseline data that can be projected, of course, with limitations to the rest of Africa, where the similar study was not taken up. I think generally what has come out, before I go to the specific areas, is that there are some traditional practices peculiar to each country that can be taken advantage of in terms of how to enhance sustainable soil management through legislation and policy. So the key focus areas have been mining, agriculture, and urbanization. At least these are the ones that I'll spend a bit more time looking at. We've also had complexities with regard to investor interest, land tenure governance, which is a common feature across most of Africa, as Patricia and Robert have already pointed out, in addition to what I will mention. And I think the issue of land tenure is really cross-cutting. It can be an issue in respect of agriculture, mining, also urbanization in terms of limited access to land and eventually soil. We have already also tried to involve policy formulation in terms of the African region through initiatives with Pan-African Parliament. And Robert has also mentioned how the African Ministerial Conference has also adopted the policy issue of looking at sustainable soil management across the African region that is spread across the 54 countries of Africa. So roughly, that is the bird's eye view that I can give about the project that I want to report on. Although most of the findings may be specific to these three countries, you will see that they relate generally to most of the African countries, especially with regard to agriculture. We can move on to the next slide, please. Sorry, Larissa, don't worry about the so many slides. I won't speak to each one of them. So there, I'm just trying to highlight the literature that has arisen from the study. The publication there also noted that chiefly we need to have efforts looking at local, national, and gradually international approaches towards sustainable soil management, as the example has been given in the three cases. Next, please. Arising out of the study, we've also had several literature in respect of Zambia, Uganda, and which other country? I think from South Africa, Namibia, not South Africa. We've had those perspectives and most of those have been highlighted. I've also done a study looking at the threats that arose from the COVID-19 pandemic with regards to ensuring sustainable soil management. And that again brings us to one of the aspects that I want to look at in terms of recommendation. And I think Robert must have alluded to that in one of his, in his presentation with regards to how we need to tie down the science, law, and policy connection. When we look at the issues that arose during the just ended, or is it continuing COVID-19 pandemic, we find that there are a lot of initiatives that we can borrow from science and put them into policy in order to strengthen sustainable soil management across the African region. Next one, please. So with respect to agriculture, as we have heard the connection from the presentation that was made by our FAO representative, Africa is moving towards the narrative of feeding itself. And while this is very much possible, the threat of soil health is really hampering efforts for Africa to feed itself. We have seen the place of Africa within the global context of fighting food insecurity. So as these countries step up and feed into the Africa feeding itself narrative, there is much more need to ensure that the soils are more productive and are yielding much more than they would ordinarily yield if it wasn't for the threat of food insecurity. So this has now led to a lot of efforts towards enhancing soil fertility. And this has brought about insurmountable pressure of using chemical fertilizers and also stepping up on some of the slash and burn practices that are modified in order to supposedly nutrify the soil, yet they also have serious aspects of how the soil can regenerate itself. So when you look across the three countries, the slash and burn practices are modified as you move from Kenya, Kenya to Cameroon and back to Zambia, as well as Uganda, which I can highlight owing to some of the studies that I've read on the subject. So when you look at the slash and burn practices, and just to explain to those who may not be aware of how this works, there's a practice where trees are cut down. So already that is affecting the forest cover. Zambia is already one of the top 3 countries that are facing severe deforestation in the world. So when you still see this practice locally known as chitemene, where some trees are cut, burnt, buried together with the soil and used to fertilize the soil, you find that this practice is outlawed by the Environmental Management Act. And also in Kenya, there is a prohibition pursuant to the Forest Conservation and Management Act, but the practices still go on because these have been traditional practices historically. So one of the issues we need to look at via the lens of the legislation is outright prohibition and criminalizing of the practice the answer, because clearly it is not working and it is affecting so many other aspects of the environment, depleting the carbon sink in the soil, contributing to deforestation, and so many other ripple effects in the environment. So as we look at these challenges from the traditional perspective, how can we analyze them and try to use them as a stepping stone towards more sustainable practices? So this generally is a practice across most of Africa, not just the 3 countries. And in terms of looking at this traditional practice, towards the end, I'll try to provide some answers on how this can be a stepping stone towards effective legislation for sustainable soil management. Next slide, please. So I can skip these following slides, even the next one, because it's really just giving a more specific focus on the challenges of the countries. When we also look at what I had mentioned on with regards to agriculture in terms of the traditional practices, again, we find that the importance of soil is also something that we can focus on in terms of building synergies between the policy makers, most of us environmental lawyers, and also the soil scientists. For instance, when you look at the example I've given on the traditional practices, there have been some alternatives that have been suggested from the scientific perspective of encouraging conservation farming and avoiding the use of shifting of slash and burn practices. I think these are all aspects that can move from mere recommendations that the scientists are giving to rope them into legislation so that they are the law and policy with regard to sustainable soil management. Then we can move on, please. We also have mining as a key driver in all the 3 countries, Kenya, Cameroon, and Zambia. And I would like to tie this to the issue that I'm not specifically focusing on, but which is critical in terms of land use and land tenure. When you look, for example, at Cameroon and Zambia, these are countries with vast mineral deposits, and most of the mining is carried out by large investor companies who somehow find a way to utilize most of the vast tracts of land that are awarded or tenured to them on long lease. You find that there is a lot of displacement that happens, and this feeds also into the narrative that I'll talk about of urbanization, rapid urbanization, where everybody wants to come First of all, in the rural areas where the mining may be happening, the inhabitants there are displaced and start to try to find greener pastures in going towards the urban areas, which is leading to the high rate of urbanization. We also re-emphasized during the research that these three countries are among the most urbanized countries in Africa, and a lot of other factors apply. But when you look at urbanization, as I will show later, rapid urbanization also has serious challenges eventually on soil, which we have seen as the melting pot of civilization around the three study areas. So despite the economic benefits that are associated with mining, we find that there are a number of negative impacts. As I am saying, it's feeding into urbanization, which in its own right is also contributing to rapid degeneration of soil, increased population in small areas, the development of shanty, sprawling townships where there is very little social amenities provided, which eventually contributes to soil contamination and leading to effects of soil erosion. When we look specifically at mining, we have mining legislation, which also focuses on trying to improve land degradation and particularly soil management. In the case of Zambia, when you look at the mining legislation, soil is mentioned as just one of those resources that need to be taken care of in terms of land left degraded by mining. However, when you look at the different regulations that apply in terms of performing environmental impact assessments prior to mining and afterwards when land needs to be remediated, you find that it's a common problem to just focus on water pollution, general land pollution, without necessarily understanding the impact that has been had on soil. When we look at the different media of the environment, say air, water, and land generally, we find that scientifically these are able to regenerate themselves in a shorter period of time compared to compared to the soil, which takes several centuries to form. So when you look at the long-term impacts on soil and the need to enhance regeneration of soil, you find that there is a lot of neglect from the mining perspective towards sustainable soil management. One of my colleagues has written a paper investigating how mining affects sustainable soil governance in Zambia. And some of the findings in this research have been that by far, compared to agriculture, mining is the leading negative driver of soil degradation in Zambia. We have so many spots of mining in Zambia that have been affected on the copper belt. It's because of copper mining.
Wrap up,
And
Pamela. 1 minute.
yes,
Thank
please.
you.
All right, let me leave mining. Let me jump very quickly to urbanization. Larissa, please skip those script. Yes. Yes. So I had briefly mentioned in terms of urbanization. Rapid urbanization, as Zambia is one of the most urbanized countries, it has also brought about immense pressure on government to look for new land. It's looking also at public health concerns. I just talked about the publication that we have with regard to how the COVID pandemic ravaged every aspect of the economy. At the end of the day, we found that the effect on soil arising from the public health concerns of the pandemic were undocumented by far, and they will continue to cause untold consequences on the rest of the economy in the country. We can move on, please. So I can just go to the last slide where I'm talking about concluding remarks. I think Robert pointed out that one of our biggest challenges when we look at soil governance, particularly from the perspective of Africa, is lack of awareness on highlighting the critical importance of soil and the aspect of all the aspects of life that it impacts on. Even when we assess the legislation, in the 3 countries that have been studied, there is no soil-specific legislation, but soil protection to some extent is dotted across all the different pieces of legislation that were analyzed, which shows that there is no concentrated and targeted approach towards this important resource at the national levels. And I think this is something we can pick up from. From the international perspective, we're informed that most of the multilateral environmental agreements, such as the Certification Convention and the CBD, they talk about soil, or rather, they are really focused on soil without particularly bringing out that importance of soil to achieving the objectives of the different legislation, which is pretty much the challenge we find at national levels. So there is a call for a highly consultative approach at all the levels, as pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sambo, for the African perspective, which we will come back to when we have our discussion afterwards. I would like to immediately, taking that time has already progressed, move to our next speaker. I acknowledge the presence of Professor Gernot Stöcklener, who has in the meantime also joined the panel. Welcome, Professor Stöcklener. But before we give him the floor, we move to Professor Ginzky from Wuhan University. Tianbao, the floor is yours, perspective from China.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So nice to meet you again. Yeah, Olive and Harald, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to the interesting event. And I'm happy today here to share my understanding about the new development of the soil protection, the legal protection of soil in China. You know, this we do not actually in China, we do not have the specific soil protection law, but we have already several relevant laws with as concerning on the legal protection of soil. For example, we have a land management law or land administration law, and we also have, for example, the soil and water protection law. That is on the from the perspective of ecological protection. But more recently, we have several very important laws enacted or under enacting, which I think is very have many interesting innovation. So maybe can be insightful the soil governance and the soil protection for other countries, or maybe for the efforts at the international level. Firstly, that we have the farmland protection law is on the drafting the whole China. The main purpose is to protect the limited the land resources in China. Secondly, you know, we have already enacted the we call this city and urban areas law. In addition to that, we have the specific first black land soil protection, black land protection law. The black land is a rare and precious resources endowed by the nature and to the human being. It is characterized by the high quality, scarcity, and easy to be eroded. Over the years, people have made the intensive development and utilization, and the thickness of black soil layer and the content of organic matter has decreased, and the soil acidification and desertification and salinizations have intensified, which have seriously affected the ecological security and the sustainable agriculture development. Now in China, which has we have already recognized the particularity and the strategic significance of black land protection from the perspective of benefiting the development of sustainable development of future generation, and promote it from the strategic height of storing green on the ground and on the technology. And this law actually is also for the need to ensure the long-term national food security. Uh, this as as we just mentioned, the black land we can see it as kind of grand panda of all kinds of land types, and the the formulation of the black land protection law is conducive to standardizing the black land protection, governance, restoration, utilization, and other activities, protect the high yield and high quality agriculture products output function of the black land, and provide a strong legal guarantee for the national food security. And the third, the law is for the purpose of maintaining the ecosystem balance. Yeah. The natural resources of a rare black land are neither renewable or nor replaceable for quite a long time due to the insufficient protection and investment, the coupled with the winter erosion and water erosions. The black soil layer has become thinner, harder, and thinner. The erosion gullies have developed, and the water and soil loss has become increasingly serious, which has led to the ecological environmental problems such as farmland fragmentation, river siltation, and worsen flood disasters. The man and nature to coexist harmoniously. Yeah. So only by enact this kind of law can provide the sufficient and strong protection of the eco environment, maintain the balance of the ecosystem, and the promotion the sustainability of resources and the environment. And thirdly, it is also the to improve the current system and the mechanism. Yeah. This law, according to the funding passed law, include have 37 articles, including the legislative purpose, scope of application, protection requirement and the principles, government responsibilities and the coordination mechanisms, planning, resources, investigation and monitoring, scientific and technical support, quantity protection measures, quality improvement measures, responsibilities of agriculture producers and operators, financial security, incentives measures, assessment and supervisions, and legal responsibilities. According to this law, the black land was defined as that the relevant regions of the Heilongjiang province, Jilin province, and the Liaoning province, and the Mongolia region. This land is characterized by high quality farmland with black or dark humus topsoil and good with good property and high fertility. And this law is trying to strengthen the overall planning coordination of the government. And because this protection of the black land cannot be undertaken by any single governmental organizations. So the overall planning and coordination are the key to forming the resultant force of the work. This law improved the government working mechanism, clarifies that the state council and the central government and the provincial government should strengthen the leadership, organization, coordination, supervision, and management, and the people at the local level should establish a kind of coordination mechanism for the black land protection. And to give the preeminence to the guidelines of planning, the local government should, on the basis of investigation and monitoring, reflect the centralized and continuous control and scientifically formulate black land protection plans. The scientific and technology means provide important support for the black land protection, and the law also provide several compulsory and incentive requirement for the investment and application of the scientific and technical means. The fourth point I want to mention is the law try to strengthen the responsibility to protect and mobilize the willingness of the agriculture producers and operators. Agriculture producers and operators should protect the black land, but at the same time, we should ensure that the protectors does not suffer loss and increase the income of the grain growers. So this law clarifies that the agriculture producers and operators should actively adopt black land conservation measures, and the state should establish a kind of reward and subsidies mechanism that combines use the maintenance and is still oriented by the protection effects and encourage the producers and the operators to protect and to get money. When we talk about the incentives, this law actually required that to establish a sound financial investment guarantee system, increase the incentive and the subsidy fund, and the fund protects such as the high standard farmland construction should meet the needs of the black land protection. And this law also required to coordinate and integrate the relevant agricultural funds to establish and improve the cross-regional compensation mechanisms. It's like the PES at the international level for black land protection, and to encourage the social funds to invest in black land protection activities. But last but not least, the law also stipulated many, the legal responsibilities, to try to prevent, prohibit, and to punish the illegal activities. So this is the most important development of the soil protection law in China. Another way of China now is to try to protect the ecosystem from a holistic perspective. Now we in addition to the law or regulations for individual ecological factors, for example, for the soil, for the grassland, for the forest, we now have enacted several comprehensive, holistic laws, such as protected areas law, such as the law on the Yangtze River, the law on the for the Huanghe River, and the law on the protection of Tibet Plateau. So the individual specific laws plus the comprehensive and the holistic laws, these two-way together provide new legal incentives for the protection of the soil protection right now in China. That's my general introduction to you and to the colleagues. Olive.
Thank you, Professor Ginzky for the Chinese perspective. It was very insightful. We shall move immediately, in the interest of time, to the next presenter, which is Professor Gernot Stöcklener, who is going to provide us with an Austrian perspective. Professor Stöcklener. No longer online. That means we will have to improvise in the meantime until he can rejoin our meeting and open the floor for questions. And I would like to give Carlotta the opportunity to share some questions, comments from the chat box.
Yes, so there have been many questions and many comments in the chat. There has been an interesting exchange with regard to sustainable agricultural practices in different countries. What raised particular interest was this slash and burn practice that was mentioned by Dr. Towela Sambo. But there were also some questions. The first one was addressed to Dr. Ginzky from Gibrilla Camara. I don't know if Gibrilla, you are here and you want to raise the question yourself. You can also use the raise your hand and then we can unmute you. But that's not the case, or I can just go ahead and read the question. So it was about overregulation and the effects of overregulation on soil management. So the question is, can overregulation affect soil management or impede the use of soil to achieve other objectives like food production, water access, and availability?
I mean, okay, thank you for the question. I raised this point of overregulation with regard to agricultural practices. One could imagine that, or this is a proposal which is on the table, has been made by legal scientists. We need a permission regime for each agricultural practice, that each farm should be controlled every 3 years and would need permission every 3 years for its agricultural activities, so to say, which would mean in practice that we have to control each farm, and we have 400,000 of them in Germany, all 3 years. So this would just not be doable for the public authorities. This is, and on the other side, I would assume that farmers also want to have a certain level of freedom in order to decide which plant to grow, which animal to raise, what economic avenue they want to take. So I would think we need to strike a balance between this freedom, the real opportunities to control, and to achieve that the land is treated sustainably. So this is, we need to strike a balance between these three concerns, you may say. And if you take only one, then maybe you come to an overregulation. This was the point I wanted to address by this term of overregulation. And I mean, this is a bit an academic perspective. If you look at this question from a political perspective, you need always political support for a solution. And the option which I have mentioned, control of each farm all 3 years, which not be, there's no chance to get political support for that. So this is awesome.
Okay, I also see that Professor Stöckliner is back. Before we give him the opportunity, we also see Gabriela Camara on the screen who had a chat question. Would you like to respond to what Dr. Ginzky said? Are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I think I want to agree largely with Dr. Ginzky, what he said about overregulation. I had a confusion when he said overregulation is one of the challenges we are facing. So I wanted to know whether overregulation is something that is actually enhancing soil governance, or overregulation is something that has negative effect in terms of achieving other objectives like food production and other related issues. So, but his insight on the question clarified what overregulation actually means. I just want to share probably what overregulation in our context means in Sierra Leone, for example. I mean, if you want to regulate, for example, the mining sector in terms of soil degradation, if you put more burden on them in terms of telling them to do certain things, to rehabilitate the land, for example, and to also give compensation to people who have
Mr.
suffered
Kamara,
damage
apologies for the
result of,
interruption, but the sound quality of your intervention is unfortunately very difficult for us to understand. I have to apologize, but we didn't really catch what you have been saying. Therefore, we need to proceed with the program. Would you be so kind to add some of the questions that you have responses to the chat, and we will come back to them after the presentation of Professor Stöckliner.
all right.
Professor Stöckliner, please, and welcome back to our panel discussion. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I had some unexpected technical problems here. The network was terminated for whatever reason. I hope that doesn't happen again during my presentation. And if it takes place, then I apologize in advance for that. So thanks for inviting me to this conference. I present the. I am allowed to do screen sharing now. And do you see my presentation? Thank you. Thank you very much. And I bring in the perspective of a spatial planner. So I'm not that much involved in legal science, as I am just applying laws on the one hand and also finding out how to amend or to find out needs for amendments of planning laws, especially with respect to new discussions, new debates that happen within the planning domain. So what I want to discuss with you and show you is an approach where we can connect soil protection with planning for climate protection, for fighting the climate crisis via integrated spatial and energy planning by shaping the energy transition and using the work on the energy transition also to protect soils. I referred to Spatial Planning Act. The Austrian situation is very complex when it comes to spatial planning, also from the from the perspective of planning legislation. We have 9 planning acts because planning is attached to the provincial level. There is no national spatial planning act, so there's only the 9 provinces or the 8 provinces plus Vienna. That is legally also a province. And we normally have 6 planning levels. We have superordinate spatial planning with provincial spatial plans, regional plans, and sectoral plans. And sectoral plans at the moment that are widely discussed very much refer to the energy transition, which means wind park developments, photovoltaic plant developments, and so on. And then we have the local spatial planning, which is also referring to a 3-level approach. It's local development strategies, land use plans, and building schemes. Actually, you see a picture. It's more for graphic design, if you want. It's a land use plan, but you can also see that for the land use plan, it's a very small fabric of land uses that are attached to each parcel of land, and that refer to open space, to construction land, building land, and to especially transport infrastructure that is shown here. All the other infrastructures get some kind of building land assigned to. In Austria, we are a rich country. We have an increasing population, mainly due to in-migration. And when we look back for the last 30 years, 1990, the baseline year of the Kyoto Protocol, for instance, when it comes to climate protection, we gained 1.5 million more people. We increased the national income 3 times. We built more than 1 million flats, for instance, and we built a lot of shopping areas. And that all leads to the situation, and that's why I come from, or this is the direction I come from, to soil protection or soil governance, is we built more or less 5.8 times the city of Vienna only in the last 20 years. And this is a lot. So in theory, we could have had much more population growth or growth of workplaces only when we look into land consumption. So that means the efficiency of the land consumption is decreasing a lot. And this high share or this high amount of land consumption, of course, lets us run into some sustainability problems that we face and where we need to take action. At the same time, we, for instance, increased the retail space per capita. It's a bit decreasing now because of Corona, at least the used part of shopping, of retail area, not the retail area as such. And it's the highest within the European Union per capita. And of course, we are also, as many other countries, run into the donut effect. That means that we empty our town centers, our village cores, and so on, and build everything new a second time on the outskirts of the existing settlements. And this, of course, also creates a sustainability problem. It creates problems with resource efficiency, with energy efficiency and resource consumption and energy consumption. That also shows that we are one of the few countries of the industrialized world that are actually really increasing their CO2 emissions. I mean, when we compare that to Germany, for instance, Germany has decreased CO2 emissions since 1990 by about 35%. We increased it about 4 or 5%. On the other hand, when you look at the per capita CO2 emissions, the ones of Austrians are still a bit lower than the ones of the Germans. So you can always interpret figures in different directions, but it doesn't matter. Anyhow, we are consuming too much or emitting too much CO2. We are consuming too many resources, and we are consuming too much land, which means we transfer too much land from bioproductive land, agriculturally active land, into building land. And of course, that also creates greenhouse gas emission problems. And that is how we approached it. Also in the research of my institute, and also in planning practice now, we do a lot of action research, work together with municipalities and provincial governments, how we approached the topic of soil protection. And how we tried to utilize the existing legal provisions for soil protection and also the targets for soil protection, and utilize energy transition thinking and also the public awareness towards the climate crisis for soil protection, how to utilize that and connect these two topics. We also have to say that we have an Austrian sustainability strategy that is confirmed over the years. I mean, it's valid since 2002, or parts of it are valid since 2002, and since then, there is a 2.5 hectare land consumption target, 2.5 hectare per day land consumption target, which means 9 square kilometers land consumption per year. And at the moment, we are at about 45 square kilometers per year. And we have a lot of zoned land that is not used yet. And only if we use the zoned land, which is about 720 square kilometers, it's not where we don't see buildings at the moment, we would have reserves in building land for the next 80 years. So you see, there's a lot that was zoned, and there's a lot that is built. And at the moment, we see that public awareness is now more or less also taking up this topic of land consumption. Also, the media show it, and therefore we have good conditions at the moment to think about it. Just to show you one example, what are we doing? For instance, we are having, this is Tulln, a small town in Austria on the Danube, the river up there, the water area is the Danube. We try to get compact settlements. We try to use the building land more efficiently, and we try to protect the green fields and also use brown fields. And the question is, when you do these strategies, where should you implement them? And what we do with integrated spatial and energy planning, we identify the areas where we all see good infrastructure, where we already see resource efficient building structures and energy efficient building structures. And we use mainly two issues, district heating, areas suitable for district heating, which means they're mixed function and they're moderately dense, or they show a certain density. And we also use priority areas for climate-friendly mobility, which again means they show intensity of land uses, of potential passengers for public transport, for instance, or also areas that are walkable and bikeable. And we identify these areas, and the idea is to bring new settlement developments in these areas or very close to these areas. And so this is an idea that is supported by the spatial planning laws to some extent. We did this, for instance, for the whole province of Styria, where we had a legal provision that said that the strategies to use energy transition or to integrate energy transition in spatial planning is in principle possible. The municipalities were entitled to do that, but they were not forced to do that. And actually, this legal provision was sitting there already since 2006, and nobody implemented it because nobody knew with which methodology should we do that. And what we did with our institute's research, we made an action research process with the province of Styria, where we identified these priority areas for further settlement development, taking district heating and environmentally friendly transport as criteria to identify these priority areas for more sustainable settlement development and more also or less land-consuming settlement development, and try to coordinate further settlement development with these priority areas. We made a database for the whole province, identifying these areas for the whole province, for each village, each construction land in the whole building land in the whole province. We provided a planning methodology and the guidance. And it was also very important that we did a capacity building program for municipal spatial planners and also for municipal decision makers. And Styria has 287 municipalities. About 140 municipalities took place in the capacity building program, took part in the capacity building program, and we reached all the planning offices, the freelance planners, and also a lot of the administrative planners active in the whole province. And also the province said, yeah, we know municipalities are entitled, but they are not enforced to do that. It's not obligatory for them. So therefore, we have to do a subsidy program supporting municipalities who join this program and join this idea. And 50 municipalities actually participated. And that brought the municipality to the idea to say, yes, this actually happened this year in April. Now we will make it mandatory. We will change the Spatial Planning Act and make this approach mandatory for all municipalities in the province. Means that this integrated spatial planning, integrated energy and spatial planning strategies are mandatory now. They are part of local spatial planning, and it means that the further settlement development has to be coordinated with priority areas for district heating and mobility. And this, of course, also will enforce a more land-saving, a more land-efficient development of urban areas of the built environment. And it is also accomplished and also amended with energy planning measures at the provincial level. We are also doing that for other provinces now. We are at the moment developing the database for 1,300 municipalities out of the 2,100 Austrian municipalities. We see changes in spatial planning acts as in other provinces as well. And so for that, I'm not only positive that we can get new provisions, legal provisions, not only for fighting the climate crisis and supporting the energy transition, which at the moment, when we started the program, fighting the climate crisis was the main driver for energy transition. In the last couple of months, this changed a lot, also for economic reasons and social reasons. But I think here we match very important societal challenges going in the right direction of sustainable spatial planning. And I think this is possible when we not only have the legal provisions, but when we can fill them with life, both on the planning side, on the methodological side, and also in the capacity building side for decision makers and planners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Stöckliner. Vielen Dank for your presentation. We have heard different perspectives from Germany, from Zambia, from Sub-Saharan Africa, from China, and from Austria, with different challenges, with different regulatory opportunities. And I would like to do the discussion around a bit different than we have done it in the morning. I would like to give every presenter 2 minutes to respond to the following questions. What are the main soil degradation drivers in your individual country or region? What are the main deficits in terms of existing legislation? And number 3, what are the proposed concepts of instruments to improve soil legislation? We have just heard from Austria being a champion in the European Union when it comes to soil sealing. 8.4 times Vienna has been lost over the past 20 years. What can be done to improve this unbearable situation, both on a federal but also a lender level in Austria? But again, in Germany, some propositions have been made. How can they be effected quickly without further ado, and also in the context of the energy crisis? In Zambia, urbanization is something that has been mentioned by Pamela, and also the detriment of the impacts and negative externalities of mining practices. How can this be remedied in a cross-sectoral level. China, of course, a complexity society per se. Professor Jianbao, what are the main deficiencies on the ground? What are the remedies to those deficiencies? 2 minutes each. Dr. Ginzky, starting with Germany.
Oliver, many thanks for this question. Actually, I tried to address this in my presentation because I started off with the main driver. The main driver in Germany right now is soil sealing, but there are of course others. Our deficiency is that we do not have a real custodian for sustainable soil management. This is our main deficiency, and I would answer your question concerning the remedies with 3 aspects. First, we need this kind of a custodian, and this should be the soil protection agencies or authorities, because they also have the needed expertise. First point. Second point, we need clear quantitative targets. Regarding soil sealing, for example, you can have a land efficiency rate, which needs to be complied with by the municipalities, or you can have an obligation to undertake no new soil sealing. You should use for new buildings already used areas, and rehabilitate them. This would be a very, very helpful obligation. And third point, we need environmental quality standards for the biological and the physical properties of soil, legally binding ones. These are the 3 very essentially needed remedies, if you ask for the most important ones.
Thanks, Harald. Of course, there are more to mention, but from an African perspective, Africa being the continent of the future, the continent of development, the continent of urbanization, what lessons can we learn from those grim European experiences that have partially been shared, and what can be done to improve soil degradation on the African continent more effectively?
Thank you, Oliver. I think the lessons are many. We've had so many experiences that have been shared, and in relation to some of the drivers that we see in Africa, and as I mentioned, which lie on land tenure mostly, I think we need, especially in relation to unsustainable agricultural practices that I had also pointed out, I think moving the direction of incentivizing rather than concentrating so much on using the whip, I think is likely to yield some progress. So perhaps in the agricultural sector, where, first of all, as I said, the biggest challenge will be the land tenure systems. I think we would need to find a way to tighten those tenure systems. I know one example that is being experimented in Zambia, in one of the provinces, is to title customary land, because one of the issues has been that when there's absence of title, the land is communal, and when something belongs to everybody, it belongs to nobody. So nobody's really taking care of what is on that land. So I think in a nutshell, I would say incentivizing some of these aspects, starting with experimental titling of the vast tracts of customary land, would mirror some of the challenges that would ameliorate some of the challenges that we have. Then also with regard to unsustainable agricultural practices, I think incentivizing the progression towards conservation and organic farming would also be helpful towards soil governance. I think we also mentioned the issue of awareness. I'm not sure how my colleagues in the other regions look at this challenge of awareness, which I think moves hand in hand with poor enforcement. Because some of the issues, as I mentioned, are already in scattered pieces of legislation. And some of the arguments that people bring that fly in the face of improving soil legislation in these countries is that we already have provisions that deal with how we can manage soil better, but they're not being enforced. So what hope is there that if we dedicate a whole piece of legislation to soil governance, that will be enforced? So I think it's a story of chicken and egg. What comes first? Is it the awareness, the enforcement? How do we work these things around? I think that's my input at the moment.
Thanks, Dr. Sambo. This leaves room for further work which needs to be done in the assessment of existing legislation, of sectoral, cross-sectoral opportunities to make this legislation more effectively. Coming to China, Professor Tian Bao, China having a population size that is almost comparable to the one of the continent of Africa, with less land mass, but also with the interest in African land mass to counter food price volatilities, and also in the interest to invest. How do you, from a national perspective, foresee the improvement of soil protection to take place? Which sectors are most prominent, and how do you see the China-Africa relationship in the discussion, in the wider context of our discussion here today? Okay. Professor Tian Bao, he has left, but he may come back. So in the meantime, Professor Stöglena, it would be interesting to hear from your perspective. Also, Austria has a long tradition in soil protection, but also a unique one. What can be learned from best practices, and where are the deficiencies that need to be remedied?
Okay, so thank you very much for the questions. Well, and also what Pamela said, awareness, of course, awareness is important, but I don't think it's the problem, because awareness just makes you feel guilty, but does not necessarily change action. What can change action if you interfere with practical constraints? And I think this is something that we have to give more attention to. And so when I just look at the spatial planning acts, I think they are quite nice, and they would also provide for sustainable spatial development, but they are embedded in a huge system, a legal system, and a system of state action that also includes, for instance, financial incentives, but is also, of course, dependent on our lifestyles and economic practices. And I mean, we are not sealing soil because we want to, and this is a state target. We are sealing soil because we have certain lifestyles and certain economic practices. And I think this is something that we really have to address too. This, of course, is also a question of awareness on the one side, but on the other side, it's not enough. And I think we are subsidizing the wrong things. We are paying taxes for the wrong things and not paying taxes, especially for the wrong things. And that makes, I think, a blind spot in the Austrian legislation, that is the availability of construction land. And what we are not touching at the moment are the existing building rights and the existing properties, especially when it comes to the transformation of unused building land. So I think we need more taxes on unused land, on brownfields, on vacant buildings, for instance, a different kind of taxation there. I think we need an additional value tax on newly zoned building land, because at the moment, when you zone new land, you increase the value of the property depending on where you are between 10 times and 1,000 times. And this is solely...
Follow-up question quickly from my side.
Yep.
We heard from Germany, Bundesbodenschutzgesetz as a federal piece of legislation, whereas in Austria, the element of soil is under the auspices of the Länder, of the federal states. is it to the benefit in the wider context of soil protection to leave it to the federal states, or would it be opportune also to consider something on a federal level?
Well, this discussion has a very long tradition and is very long lasting. In Austria, so far until 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said yes. I think we need a federal spatial planning law, a state spatial planning law, and a state soil protection law, and so on. But we've seen a few pieces of legislation in the last couple of years, and also now at the moment being discussed, where I would say that the state as such, the national state, shows that he has no real planning competence, and not in the legal sense, but in the perspective of planning. It would create the need to have new administrations, to have to build up new knowledge. And I'm not sure if it changes much, because you have to break it down to the local level and the regional level, and that means that you need the local and regional authorities to do that. And practically, I'm not sure if it makes so much change, because when we compare, for instance, the land consumption with Bavaria, the Austrian land consumption and per capita, and the Bavarian land consumption, there's not much difference. So it's more or less the same. And so I'm not so sure if this really would make the real difference. What might make the real difference is to have the right strategies, to formulate targets, and really break that down to regions and to the local scale. I think there was the same idea also presented from Germany, or from the German perspective. And I think this is very important and much needed. When it comes to implementation, I think especially when it comes to what we need, and what we need is to activate existing building land and to transform existing building land. And this is, I think, very much important, to talk with the landowners, to talk with the users, to talk with the neighbors of new projects, and so on. And this has to be done on the local level.
Thank you, Professor Stöcklener. I'm going to utilize the discretional power of being the moderator of this session and extend the session for another 5 minutes, because Professor Jianbao is going to elaborate on the questions that have been posed to him. Welcome back, Professor Jianbao.
Hello, I'm sorry, I was lagged out, forced to lag out just now. I missed your question. Could you please repeat it?
Yes, Professor Jianbao, we wanted to find out from you what are the main aspects of soil degradation and drivers in China that need to be attended to. What are the main deficits in terms of current soil legislation, and what are you proposing to correct those deficits as next steps? And taking that we had also representation from Africa in this panel, and that we had discussions around food security in the first panel this morning, I would like to ask you, without an intrusion in terms of diplomatic correctness, how do you foresee Chinese investments in Africa, for instance, influence the food security situation when it comes to the possession of land, when it comes to counter food price volatilities on the international food markets?
Okay, yeah, there's several many questions. Yeah, firstly, I think for China, the main problem, or the main driving force for the soil protection is the overuse of the land of the soil, because China has the bigger population in the world, and we need to provide the food security firstly by ourselves. And the historical experience of China to support to feed the Chinese people is try to use the soil and the land very extensively, very intensively. So that's the problem, that's the kind of historical problem. Quite a long time till now we have this problem. Second is this in the quite a long time, we used a lot of the chemical the fertilizers, which is we call it we in some ways kind of we call it the green revolution. Actually, this green revolution has both good side and bad side. Yeah, this kind of international trade of green revolution in the quite a long time in the past time, quite a long period in the past has provided the good the gain the food production, but also provided the soil and land contamination. Third is the industrialization occupied a lot of land. That's the reason China tried to provide a new law. This called as farmland protection law. We have the very strict policy on, we call it farmland red line. You cannot cross the red line. Yeah. This the problems. And I think the good side is that, as I mentioned in my very short presentation just now, that according to the new development model or the new development philosophy in China, maybe you have known that this ecological civilization. So the whole China has transferred from the old mode of development to the new model. This new model tried to balance the economic development and the environmental protection, especially for China, which is unlike the US, European countries. We can say this model is kind of pollution first, then control or clean up later. This is the past experience of the European and other developed countries. But for China, for South Africa, for Brazil, for India, for those countries, they have to coordinate the two aspects, environment and economy at the same time. According to my understanding, I think China has provided kind of a successful experience. And in addition, according to the ecological civilization, they call for a kind of a holistic protection of all kinds of ecological elements. So when we talk about the soil protection, we cannot protect the soil individually or separately. We must consider the interrelationship of the soil with other elements of the ecosystem. For example, with water, with the forest, with grassland, with all of them. Now, China has implemented the idea of the holistic protection very much. So that's the reason I suggest, I indicated just now that we have several holistic laws for the river basins, for the protected areas, for the Qinghai Tibet plateau, the very big areas in China, provided the holistic and integrated protection. And in addition, now we have an individual specific the land protection law that is called black land. The black land in the northeast part of China, which is we call it the home of the rice. Now, that is very important from the legal perspective. And following the ecological civilization philosophy, China's overseas investment in the road and belt area countries, I think majority of the Chinese investors has followed the local environmental law and followed the Chinese domestic laws. And this last June, end of June and the beginning of July, I was in the Nairobi. I met a lot of the local people. They told me very interesting. I found it's a lot of professors from Wuhan University has very close collaboration with their colleagues in Nairobi, in other Kenya universities. They are biological diversity, biological science professors. they try to provide the Chinese the side of financial, technical, and knowledge support to them, and they provide. And a lot of people told us that they help the Kenya people to improve their food security situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Jan Bao. To put everything in a nutshell at the end, I know it was a challenging set of questions, and you've mastered them very well in a limited period of time. I come to conclude the session, best practices and innovative regulatory approaches. We have done justice to the matter in the limited time available. I would like to thank the panelists and adjourn this meeting to 14:45 Central European Time, which will be a very short but intensive break for everyone. Goodbye, everyone.
Professor Schott, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here, and it would be great if we can try if everything works.
Perfect. Would you like to try screen sharing? I think I've given you the presenter role.
Good. Do you see the presenter mode or the presentation?
We see the presenter mode.
Okay, good. Can you see now the presentation or still presenter mode?
Still presenter mode.
Good. Is it now the presentation?
Yes.
Good. Okay, super. Thanks.
Thanks so much.